Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all good and well. So time for a Saturday premiere. And for this premiere, I'm going to be revisiting all my 9 out of 10 scores on the channel. This is obviously me going back through my album reviews, and I've checked out which albums I gave 9s out of 10s to, and they're all here, all in these two rows here at the bottom of the tier list. I'm using a tier list format because I thought that might be the best and most easiest way to do this video rather than doing one by one and the editing of that taking forever. So I'm like, let's do this all as a tier list. And you can see the rows here, self-explanatory. If I think an album is still a 9 out of 10, it will go into the 9 out of 10 tier. If I actually think it's even better than a 9 now, having had much more time with the album, it may go into the 10 out of 10 tier. Obviously, some of these albums, having gone back to them and having had much more time with them, I may decide actually they're not as good as I first thought they were. And I think we may get a few cases of this for this list. I always think it's quite often more likely with me anyway. I'm quite a generous reviewer. I sometimes slightly, I think, overrate albums. So I'm more on that side than some, a lot of other YouTube reviewers that tend to go maybe on the other way and are much more negative. I am quite positive generally with my reviews, although I tend to review albums that I want to listen to. So I think that generally means that most of my scores are always going to be around the 7 or 8 region. But yeah, no, they're all 9 out of 10s here, or at least the original score of all these albums was 9 out of 10. So that's what we're doing. We're going to go through all of these. I'm going to decide how now, with the benefit of hindsight, I would rate these. And I always like to say in my reviews anyway, you should always have the ability, and the room to change your view on something over time. It's not necessarily set in stone when I give any score on an album. If I give something a 5 out of 10, it doesn't necessarily mean it's permanently a 5. There is always room for an album score to actually change. It's always kind of a fluid thing. And I think some people get very fixated if you give a score that's maybe lower than usual and they think, well, that's the score forever. And it isn't necessarily the case. So always keep that in mind with the channel and lots of these channels, I imagine. Some may say they're fixed on the score, but I think it's rarely the case. I think in a lot of cases, we can change our minds. Anyway, get that out of the way. And let's move on with this. So starting off with my album of the year from 2021, Ayrton, Access All Worlds. I have not changed my mind on this album at all since 2021. It is a fantastic sci-fi concept, progressive metal album with wonderful operatic vocals from the singer John Aldara. There are many highlights on this album. I mean, my personal favorite songs on here are Layhem's Golden Pits, Waves Below, Journey Across the Endless Night, I think it is, and the Weaver System, or Safe Across the Endless Night. So many stellar tracks, no pun intended, it being a journey through the stars, of course. It's a 9 out of 10. Still a 9. Still a 9. Is it even a 10, maybe? Interesting thought. I don't think I would give the album a 10, even though it's my album of the year. Album of the year doesn't necessarily mean 10 out of 10, but it does usually mean a pretty high score. But yeah, the replay value and everything is another factor in all of this. And this album I've revisited quite a bit since that original list back in 2021. So yeah, still a 9. Moving on to Imperium, Über den Sternen, this folk metal, very classical sounding album, actually, a lot of classical elements. For me, the moments that stood out were the operatic vocal moments that came in. And there weren't actually that many of these. I think those moments stunned me so much. They affected my sort of feeling of the album in my earlier listens. Over time, though, I don't know if I love this one quite as much as I did originally. I have to be honest. I've not been back to it a huge amount either. I think it ended up being an honourable mention for that year too, which reflected maybe that my mind had even changed a bit after a few months, having scored it very high at first. So Imperium, Über den Sternen, I think I would score an 8 now. It's still a really good album, and don't get me wrong, but it does have quite a long lull in the album with sort of instrumental moments that I think just kind of all kind of blur into one a little bit, as I recall. So yeah, I think this one's an 8 now for me. Anneke van Giersbergen. For me, this was an album that slipped under the radar of a lot of people. Obviously, I watched a lot of metal channels and metal reviewers who wouldn't have this on their list. This is a solo, you know. Annika, formerly of The Gathering, though, of course, the Doom / progressive metal kind of. I'd say gothic metal a bit more, maybe from the 90s at least. Then they went more alternative as time went on. But Annika van Gisbergen, she's a really great singer. I also think she's a very good songwriter, showing off her songwriting skills from this album. The album only has one track I don't really like, but all of the others are awesome. The track I don't like, I think, is I Saw a Car, which I just thought, you know, the lyrics weren't too fantastic. I didn't really like those as much on that song, but the rest of this album was really, really good. I'm a big Annika van Gisbergen fan, just generally. I think she's amazing. So that bias aside, though, I just think it is a 9 out of 10. I'm sorry, it's still a 9 for me. This album, it's not a super complex album, right? Albums don't have to be complex to be great albums. Some people are obsessed with technicality. I don't always think. I think if you've got good soul, some basically good songs, even if they have familiar song structures, right? You've got good songwriting skills, and you've got great melodies, which this album has in droves. You have a good album. So yeah, Annika van Gisbergen still a 9 for me. Anyway, let's crack on with some of these. I'm taking a while to get through these. So Witch the North by Burning Witches, still a 9. I'm not going to talk about that one much because I did a ranking of Burning Witches recently, and I explained I still think it's a bang. It was my number 2. Right, my number 1 is as close to a 10, I think, as one of the Burning Witches albums. We get that is, of course, Hexenhammer. Incredible album, that one, as I discovered fairly recently. But Witch of the North, for me, it still is a 9. That album is still a 9 for me. I mean, it's got tracks like, you know, Flight of the Valkyrie, Thrall, Nine Worlds. Yeah, I could go on. Anyway, moving on to Between the Buried and Me, Colors 2. Yeah, that's still a 9. Even that is veering towards 10 out of 10 territory. I don't think I would quite give it a 10. I'm not sure Human as Hell has stuck with me quite as much as I thought that last track would. And there were a couple of other tracks on there that, you know, don't quite love. So it doesn't quite make it to 10. So yeah, I think it's a 9 out of 10 still. Between the Buried and Me, Colors 2, a classic. I think already a sort of future classic, if you like, this one, because it's so good and does really well to follow up on Colors, which is a rare thing for albums that are sequels, I think, to follow up nicely. So we get mostly, I haven't changed my mind much on these albums so far, apart from the Imperium one, only a little bit, though. It's only gone down to an 8. That's not a big change. So far, so good. Next up, Rivers of Nihil, The Work. Now, this is an interesting one. I gave it a 9, I believe. I think now I'm probably closer to an 8. And that may be the effect of Where Owls Know My Name just being such a great album. And this was a follow-up to what is a modern classic in progressive metal for me. But The Work is still a fantastic album. It's still at least an 8. I'd say probably an 8.5, if I'm being honest. I don't think its score has fallen much. You know, it's still an absolutely superb album. But it's not one I go back to. Replay value is important here. And all these 4 albums, interestingly, are ones I've been back to quite a bit. So maybe that's the reason why I'm keeping them as 9 somewhat, because replay value is important in how I view some of these albums. So, yeah. Next up, we've got Converge and Chelsea Wolfe, an interesting album. Actually, again, this one I haven't been back to. In fact, I don't think I've been back to this maybe once in the last kind of year or two. So, yeah, not much replay value here, which is an interesting one. It's the first time, maybe the first 2, 3, 4, 5 times I loved this album, but it's not had the durability. So, I mean, I think Chelsea Wolfe and Converge, yeah, great collaboration, really good. I think it's going to be an 8 though for me. I don't think I would downgrade it as low as a 7, mind you, but I think it's an 8 out of 10. I think that one did get a lot of hype, and maybe that got, you know, that somewhat can subconsciously influence us when there's so much hype about things. Not always with me, actually. I really try and get too carried away with others' hype and try to judge things myself first. Aetherius, Leiden, an album I remember. I think I was one of the only reviewers I think actually reviewed this album. I don't think many others did. This is still a 9. I think this is still a 9, actually. Within this kind of genre of technical death metal, this really stood out last year. I thought it was a really good album. It was sort of technical death, but with some real hard sort of you know, slamming guitars and, you know, big bottom notes and lots of, you know, still lots of groove despite its technicality. I still really enjoy that album. I've still been back to it quite a bit. So yeah, I think I'm still going to give that a 9. Maybe it's an 8.9 or 8.8. I don't know, maybe, but it's still high enough, I think, to fall into the 9 category. Persephone Metanoia, my album of the year last year. Now, you know what? This album, I think, is amazing. Interestingly, in the comments, a lot of people are saying, you know, they don't think it's that great. They think Persephone can do better. They think Spiritual Migration's the better album. Well, I haven't really checked out Spiritual Migration, actually, still. So many albums to check out, though, you know. It's difficult, guys. It's difficult. But you know what? I think this this really has hit me, and I've listened to this so much. I think it's good technically. I think production's good. I think, you know, yes, it does have one or two moments that maybe lull a touch, but it all works in the context of the album for me. It starts off pretty fast and heavy, but it nicely goes into sort of more ambient, spacious moments with superb use of guest vocal spots, I believe, on this album as well. And it's, yeah, I don't know. Since I'm not going to use 10 much, I might just use it for Persephone, but that's probably a 9.8, 9.7 sort of score, but that's so close to a 10. I think we'll put Persephone in 10. It's really been that, you know, I've really loved the hell out of that album so much, and it was my album of the year last year, so don't mind giving it a 10. All right, Allegiant. Right, Allegiant, this one's an interesting one as well. So I think this is going to be a solid 8 for me. I really like this album. Riley McShane, I mean, I have learned that he's actually left Allegiant. I didn't realize that till quite recently. But his vocals on this album, I thought, were a star part of the album. Great guitar solos, lots of melodic death metal moments. There's a real influence of that on this album. I think it's a really good album. But the second half for me doesn't quite stack up to the first half on repeated listens, having a longer time with the album. So it's probably an 8 for me now, the Legion. Yeah, so nothing has been scored down much yet. I haven't scored any 7, so, you know, I'm sticking to my guns on most of these albums. Inophelion, another one which I think has lost its replay value for me a bit. The album is another album that starts off with a bang, with the tracks stacked towards the start of this one. I just think it's a great, you know, melodic black metal that kicks off so well, but somewhat as the album goes on, I still think it doesn't quite keep me fully involved in it. So again, I think it's an 8 for me. So yeah, I've changed my mind on a few of these albums. So, but now we're going to move on to something different. Annie Hamilton, The Future Is Here, but it feels kind of like the past. I saw Annie live as well, and she was really good last year in London. It was my first gig, I think, for a long time. It might have been my first gig since the pandemic, you know, since before the pandemic, rather. Anyway, she is quite some songwriter. I think her real strength is in writing some really great songs. That really shines through on this album. Pieces of You is maybe my highlight on this. All the doors in my head are slamming into one another, I think, is one of the other star tracks on here. I think the album has a great flow. It goes a little bit more shoegazy and melancholic towards its end, but great indie album. I think it's still a 9. I'd say it's about an exact 9 for me, this album. Still a great album. White Ward, okay, 9 straight away. I've listened to this one quite a bit since it came out. I love having this one on in the car because it's sort of cinematic, and for the longer journeys on my longer drives, this is a great soundtrack, and it's so moody. But despite its length, it's quite a long kind of proggy, atmospheric black metal album. But it doesn't really kind of have a moment where I feel disinterested. I think it's a great cinematic album. Just the album cover's not so good, to be honest, this one. But yeah, no, amazing Ukrainian band. Really, they are putting out some fantastic albums lately. This being, I think, their 4th studio album. It's a dead certain 9. Maybe even this is another one. Came number 6 in my top 20 of I think this one has actually grown on me even more since 2022. So it is one that could be approaching towards 10. But let's keep it. Let's stay calm. Let's keep this one in 9. Porcupine Tree, Closure Continuation, another one that's easy for me to just say that's going straight to 9. Lots of repeat listens, to Porcupine Tree, closer continuation. Fantastic album. One of my favorites from the band, actually. And I have a lot of favorites from Porcupine Tree. You know, Fear of a Blank Planet, Absentia, Dead Wing, you know, Lightbulb Sun. All those albums, great albums. This one is up there. It's up there with those, I think. Again, Morphied. Now, Morphied were they were so great to interview, actually, when I guest interviewed on Chill Dude on a Couch's channel, and they were so great. And you know what? The replay value of this album, and I still think it's authentic. It has sort of back-to-back stellar tracks. I still think this is a 9, you know. I still think I'm gonna stick to my guns on Morphied. I don't think I've changed my mind on that one. It's just got a lot of replayability and just really cool dynamics that just keep you attending the music the whole way through. It's just a really good album for me. So I think I'm going to keep that as a 9. Revocation, Never Heaven. Now this is an interesting one. I'm saying that almost with every album here, aren't I? And that's going to, God, take a drink every time I say this is an interesting one on this video. You will be very intoxicated, very intoxicated. So I'm going to try not to say it anymore. All right, so Revocation, Never Heaven. Straddles for me between an 8 and a 9. It's actually maybe my favorite album from Revocation apart from their debut. Their debut album's phenomenal. I love their debut album. One of those bands with an amazing debut album. Let's put them in 8. I mean, I'd say they're close to a 9. This album is like, I think it was my number 11 in 2022, my top 20 list. Maybe it straddles between an 8 and a 9, to be honest. If I could put it in betweeny, I would. But it's going to stay top of 8. All right, Always. Oh, you know, everybody knows I'm an Always fanboy and I'm biased towards Always, all this kind of stuff, right? I think they're great. They are. Do you know what? Whether or not I'm biased towards them, I think this album, it really is great. Its replay value is through the roof. I mean, I've been back to this 100 times, I reckon. And I know I'm sort of focusing a bit on replay value, but this songwriting, it's not quite Antisocialites. I would say that. I will concede that. And I gave this a 9.5. And I will also say I think it's a 9, probably not a 9.5. So it's still going into the 9s here. I do think, though, that there are a couple of songs on there that do a bit less for me. But the album as a whole flows fantastically well. I do think the songwriting is as good as it ever has been with Always, almost as good as it was with Antisocialites. But Antisocialites just has something special about it, probably because it's a personal attachment for me, because that album was a real help during the pandemic, the first lockdown, and when we all felt like rubbish. During that first lockdown, the Always Antisocialites album, that is maybe one of my other 10s out of 10s. But yeah, Blue Rev is a 9 for me, I think now. Not a 9.5, not quite a 9.5, but a 9 still. All right, Ne Oblivis Scaris Exhale. So we're moving on to this year's albums now. That's exciting. 3 recent ones. Have I changed my mind on any of these already? Well, I don't think I have with Ne Oblivis Scaris, but I haven't been back to it loads. But when I've listened to it, I've loved the hell out of it. So I'm keeping it in 9. But give it another few months. Maybe that will change. Maybe it will change up. Maybe it will change down. I don't know. You'd expect it to be on my end of year list. But again, there's still 5 months of the year left. So there's still time for me to change my mind on that as well. But for now, I think it is still a 9. It's still hanging in there. Ne Oblivis Scaris, you're hanging in there. Keep in there, guys. Cloak. Now, this Black Flame Eternal, wasn't it called? I liked this a lot, and I still think it's also a 9. I still think it's also a 9. Yeah, just a really good black metal album, kind of blackened. I was going to say, what would you call it? Blackened Doom or Doomed Blackened or Doomed Black? Doomed Black. I don't know. Anyway. It's Cloak. It's a good album. It's a very, very good album. I still think I'm going to keep this as a 9. Again, it's kind of a right on a 9. It's not super above a 9 or below it much, but I think it's right on a 9. I loved the way this album flowed, particularly. It was very cohesive and it had lots of memorable moments. I think it was very, very well constructed. So it's keeping its 9 out of 10. There's the proper rationale instead of me getting lost on silly subgenre comments and stuff like that. Right, next up is Scar Symmetry, and this kind of long album title for this. Can't remember the album title now. No, actually, you know what? This is the only album I think that I have changed my mind on quite a bit. And I know it got very mixed reviews, but actually on repeated listens, I don't think this is a 9. And I'm not even sure it's an 8. I think it's the only album I would put down to a 7. And that's a shame. Do you know what? I'll tell you this. As a guitarist, I'm very blown away by great guitar moments on an album. And they had a lot of superb spellbinding guitar solos throughout this Scar Symmetry album. But when I listen to the album front to back, time and time again, the songs kind of don't quite last as long as songs for me in terms of their appeal. And that's the thing with this, the new Scar Symmetry album that's made me score it down. In fact, 2 points down, which is quite a difference. So that one, yes, I changed my mind on that. Anyway, thanks everybody so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you drop a sub, if you enjoy these kind of videos, obviously next premiere, next Saturday's Epica albums ranked. An almost impossible job, this one, because Epica don't really have any bad albums. In fact, they have several like amazing albums. So that's been almost impossible. But yep, that's the next premiere next Saturday. So hope you join me for that. Otherwise, from me, take care, everybody, and bye for now.